Everything Except the Law will begin after a brief word from Answering Legal. Visit answeringlegal.com to learn more about our virtual receptionist team.
I heard horror stories of how practices handled their calls and it didn't seem efficient. I chose Answering Legal right when I started my practice. It was one of the best decisions regarding the Harrison firm. Answering Legal allows me to spend more time with my children, my husband. I don't have to worry about losing clients or calls because I know that they're there to pick up the phone when I'm not. The Harrison firm would not be as successful as it is without Answering Legal.
Welcome back to Answering Legal's Everything Except the Law podcast. I'm your host, Taryn Winter Brill. Just call me TWB. So I'm super excited to be here. This is my very first time hosting Everything Except the Law. Just a heads up, moving forward, I'll be sharing hosting duties with longtime host Nick Worker. So for all of you super Nick fans out there, not to worry, you haven't seen the last of him. And if this is your first time tuning in, this is the podcast where we share expert advice on all of the parts of running a law firm that attorneys weren't exactly trained for back in law school. On today's show, we welcome back an old friend and get to know a pair of new ones. First up, Robin Wolpert, treasurer for the Institute for Wellbeing in Law, also known as IWIL. She's returning for her second appearance. You might recognize her. Joining Robin is Tara Antonipillai, who serves as IWIL's at-large director. We're also very excited to welcome Joan Bibelhausen. She's the executive director of the organization Lawyers Concern for Lawyers. Now, in this episode, we're going to be focusing on lawyer well-being and how the legal industry is evolving when it comes to wellness-related issues. So without further ado, let's get to our three incredible guests. Robin, Tara, Joan, thank you all so much for joining us today. It's great to see you.
Great to be here.
So nice to be here.
I'd like to kick things off just with each of you telling us a little bit about yourselves, how you came to be involved in supporting lawyer well-being and mental health, and why it's so important to you. So Robin, we can start with you.
All right. So I practice at Sapentia Law Group in Minneapolis. I do white-collar crime and complex civil litigation. How I got involved with well-being is all due to Joan Bibelhausen. I was president-elect of the Minnesota State Bar Association back in 2016, and that's when the Blockbuster report started coming out regarding we actually had data regarding lawyer well-being. The data was devastating, dispiriting, and I would also add shocking. And Joan came to me and told me about what was happening, and I got educated. Joan has been with me, educating me for a very long time on well-being. She's the director of the Lawyer Assistance Program in Minnesota. And so I made it an issue, probably one of my key issues when I was bar president, along with judicial elections issues and so forth. But ever since then, I got hooked because it was really just something that I wanted to really give back to the newer generation of lawyers because they're hardest hit and when it comes to well-being. But the state of the profession seemed devastating to me, and there was an opportunity to start educating people and mobilizing people and making it okay and acceptable just to even talk about well-being. So I just want to, again, thank Joan for everything she has done for me and continues to do for me.
Yeah. And just curious, Robin, just timeline wise, when was this that you got introduced to Joan and started?
This was 2016, 2017 when I was bar president at Minnesota State Bar, but now I'm president of the National Conference of Bar Presidents, which is a national group of bar leaders from across the country. And I've been able to bring well-being, front and center for that organization. And again, Joan has been to our meetings. She's spoken to our people, and it's been really important to get the word out and start educating people. So it's just okay to talk about well-being, just like we talk about other things, and that it's important in people's lives to be healthy because a good lawyer is a healthy lawyer.
Absolutely. Words to live by. Now, Joan, Robin's just sung your praises. You're the reason she's gotten involved. So quickly tell us how you came to be involved and if you had a mentor just like her.
Well, thank you. And Robin, you're too kind. I think you would have carried this somehow. You would have found this area because it fits so well with everything you do. I remember your speech when you accepted the gavel for the Bar Association. You talked about a bar association for everyone with no one left out. And that was a really big theme for your year, where it's where everybody can participate regardless of where they are at. And so I've been the director at our organization, which is the Lawyer Assistance Program for Minnesota. Every state has one, for 19 years. And our program has been, and I have been talking about what do we do to be able to reduce our risk around the kinds of things that were codified in the 2016 report, which were things that kind of the people in my line of work we knew about. But having greater information and subsequent things coming out meant that we had allies and we had more people in the profession. We had people like Robin who were going to develop into this. We've had others who have found a calling in being able to talk about well-being from all sorts of different contexts. And so I came to this because I had been volunteering for our lawyer assistance program more from a perspective of working with people who were really struggling with career issues. That the stress of being a lawyer was having an impact. Imagine the person, working for a life insurance company who only sees the really, really awful cases because that's the only time they have to take it to the legal department. And I found that I was really passionate about working to help those folks find new ways, either within or outside of the law. And so working for the Lawyer Assistance Program was a natural progression.
Yeah, that sounds like it's such important work. And Tara, just curious how you got involved.
Yeah, for sure. So my background, I'm a tax lawyer by training. I worked at a big firm in DC. I did almost exclusively nonprofit tax work. Unlike some people who switch careers, I really enjoyed what I did, and I worked at a firm that was a really nice sort of legal home for me. I ended up taking some time off to stay home with my 4 kids, and then my plan had always really been, though, to switch careers. So I knew that I would go back to school for something in the psychology space. I had a long-term interest in well-being. I've been a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher for many years. And to be perfectly truthful, I didn't really think I would go back to working with lawyers. So I thought that I would switch careers. And then I just started kind of around the same time frame as Robin is mentioning. When I started thinking about going back to school and doing other things, I started getting involved with the DC Lawyer Assistance Program, and also with as a volunteer, and also doing some work for the firm that I had left years before, kind of teaching some basic mindfulness and stress reduction classes, and then sort of my 2 interests of nonprofit work and also well-being work started overlap. So I went back to school. I have a master's in applied positive psychology from Penn, and I do a lot of work for IWIL on programming as well, but I do not practice law anymore. I only work as a consultant.
Gotcha. Well, we're fellow alumni. I went to the University of Pennsylvania undergrad, so go Quakers. But I just want to pick up on one thing you said. You said you were planning on a career change, no longer being a lawyer. Obviously, based on the topic we're talking about today, was it because of mental health issues? If you don't mind me asking, what was that a part of it or no?
I don't mind you asking at all. That wasn't what motivated the change, to be honest. I working in a big firm and doing the work that I did, I liked, but I wouldn't say it was particularly fulfilling for me from a kind of meaning, passion, purpose perspective. I wanted to do something that was more, I would say maybe more of a direct helping profession. The kind of work that I did didn't necessarily feel like that. I guess I'll say that.
Okay, fair enough. Now, Robin, you were back on the show we mentioned earlier in 2022, and you talked about how the legal industry was more willing to discuss wellness issues, particularly after the pandemic. Have you seen that trend continue now that we've sort of turned the corner, you might say, on the pandemic, or is it not so much in the forefront? Okay, you do.
I do. I see, I go to bar meetings, across the country. I just came back from the Maine State Bar Convention where they were spotlighting and highlighting well-being. The president, Jonathan Dunitz, decided 4 years ago he was going to make well-being his platform. But I've seen this beyond the Maine State Bar. Other bars are really seizing on this because they know that their members are hungry for information and really want to start to take care of themselves better. I think there's been a lot of education by bar associations around this issue. I know at the National Conference of Bar Presidents, every meeting we're focused on well-being in one form or another, some sort of program. And bars see it as like something that it's for everybody. So it's not just, an issue where maybe you're struggling with some, mental health or chemical dependency issue or something. It's or anxiety. It's for everybody. Yeah. Even if you're functioning and you think you're doing just fine, how do you achieve peak performance? Well, that's just another way of talking about flourishing. So it's for everybody. And I do think that bars view it as just something where everyone can agree. In an era where we have so much divisiveness about so many issues in the law, this is an issue where we all come together about, preserving and promoting the flourishing of our profession.
Right. And I'm just curious, and Joan, I'll ask you this. You guys have been working in this area for a long time. Would you say, though, that the pandemic was the catalyst kind of for this conversation to start about well-being when it comes to lawyers? Because well-being and work-related issues have always been at the forefront, mental health issues, but people just weren't willing to talk about it. So, Joan, would you say that was the catalyst to really get it out into the mainstream?
I think that these conversations were happening. I think that the pandemic meant that we had to go over here and do this for a while and figure these kinds of things out. There's a writer, Dr. Ann Maston, who talks about surge capacity. And this is where what we have to do is something happens and we have to all hands on deck and figure out how to do things. And organizations and offices that said we will never be remote all of a sudden had to be. And so people figured out how to do things, but they had to do that for a while. And well-being was one of the things that I think was sort of skating along on the ice with all of these things, where how are people doing with this? Because the conversations had begun, there could be more conversations about, well, how do we support people? How do we make sure that people who come from different places can be able to function and even thrive in this? And yes, we're doing all we can. And yes, we know there's a lot we can't do. And then I think there's also an increased attention to neurodiversity. And I think we've seen that within national and regional and state bar associations, where that's something that's being attended to. And that means that we think differently. And you can take those principles and apply them to, so how do we support people in being able to do their best work, which really is well-being. And then combined with that, then what we had, I think, is as we start to come out of it, we say, well, what's it going to be like now? We have a chance to do some things. And so we couldn't keep surging. You can't keep doing that. But what you can do is say, what now? What have we learned? What can we do with this? And I think there was a much greater willingness to say, okay, let's talk about how you do your best work, because it's about best returns on investment. It's about how people are doing, are feeling the most belonging in an organization. And it's also very much a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue, including neurodiversity, but so many other areas. And so I think it kind of, it's almost like it was boosted in a way as something that's important. And yet I believe those conversations had started.
Okay. And just to pick up on that, related to the pandemic, you mentioned it was all about remote working. So it was an environment that was new for everyone. So when you think about wellness issues being an issue before, now you have a whole host of other issues contextually being thrown into the mix. So Tara, just curious your perspective on it. Do you think mental health and well-being was exacerbated by remote working, or did it create a whole new set of challenges that had never been discussed before? Just curious your experience.
Yeah, such an interesting question. And I think in some ways we're still figuring that out a little bit in terms of what does the research show around that. I will say that I think there's much greater awareness. I think personally, I mean, remote work is a bit of a touchy issue, but to me, I mostly work with people in larger firms, and those people that did not have a basis for connection relationships that were in person. So people who are on the earlier end of their careers, I do think have had some negative impacts in terms of well-being from being remote, and not just from being remote, but from, let's say, for example, receiving many of their assignments by email as opposed to in person or over the phone, right? So I do think that there are some things that have impacted that. It so depends on what your work environment is, though. I grew up in upstate New York. My dad and my brother run a regional law firm together. And I don't know that work environment has changed as much. They're still very much in person, and I think a lot of things have remained the same. So I do think it depends on what work your environment, but remote work is, I still think it is a mixed bag for people.
Yeah. Joan, I wanted you to chime in on this because, like Tara just alluded to, right? I mean, there was lawyer burnout before the pandemic, but then you had remote capacity, and it's a whole new ball game. So we know that mental health and addiction are two significant problems for the legal community. But when you add in remote work, have there been other challenges developing for attorneys when it comes to well-being that you've seen in your experience, issues people are dealing with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of things that people really came to us with. One was kind of much more big picture, which was as there were actual threats to one's survival. Do I want to do this?
Yeah.
Is this what I want my legacy to be? And so a lot of people were really questioning and looking at doing some soul searching and introspection and meeting with counselors and attending careers groups and attending well-being groups and things like that to sort of figure some of those things out. But then in addition, we saw that, people who were introverts had struggled in a traditional environment. Now it was the people who were extroverts that were struggling. And so the introverts suddenly had something to offer. And so I think that leveled the playing field in some ways if people were willing to listen to each other.
Interesting.
I think there was, newer lawyers were mentioned. And there's also a concept that we really saw a lot of and we still talk about, which is anticipatory grief. And of course, some of us lost people during COVID, and Robin and I both live in the community where George Floyd was killed, and so there's grief around those kinds of things. But sure. Anticipatory grief is something more about, what am I missing? What did I plan on, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get it? You're told, you're given all these benchmarks, all of these suggestions for connections. Here's how you're going to advance your career. Here's how you're going to meet people within your law firm or other organization. Here's how you're going to succeed. And yet here you are thinking that, well, you might be walking down the hall and you could look and see if the partner you wanted to touch base with seemed to be, open to it. You're not going to do that with an email or a Teams reach out. And so that was missing. And people grieved that thing that was missing. And I don't know that we even quite realized that that's what we're doing. And so that something's missing, I'm not succeeding, I'm not meeting goals, I'm not meeting my own expectations, rising to the level of imposter syndrome. We saw a lot of that. And to a certain extent, there still is. And so those are a couple of the trends that I think we observed.
Robin, your thoughts on this? Joan mentioned anticipatory grief, imposter syndrome. What's been your experience with this new set of challenges since the pandemic? And what have we learned and how are we dealing with it?
Well, since the pandemic, I think that people really, like you suggested, TWB, that people are, really, it's okay to talk about well-being. I think that's a big deal because, and especially with the newer lawyers, they expect it. And they are providing some sort of push, up in their organizations for limits on hours, for example, or willingness not to be on a partner track. Okay, things like that. So big firms, big organizations are feeling that. And so the senior lawyers need to provide help for them. Because if it's just coming from the bottom, the only options are that it gets squashed out and ignored and people leave. And so there's high turnover. So I think the expectations have changed. But what I did like about the pandemic was this feeling that everyone was coming together to protect people's health, that it was okay to do that. And you did it by looking out for your team. Like I know for my teams that work with me, I look out for that. But now I felt like it was more common for people to do that, which was exciting, that we could talk about how to manage and lead teams in a way that promoted peak performance and well-being. And I love that. But I will tell you that what Joan was saying about extroverts, I'm an extrovert. I found it shocking to be home. And so I ended up learning how to channel my extrovert energy, by Zoom or meetings on my driveway where people were sitting in chairs that were appropriately socially distant and all that kind of stuff. But I will tell you that it was, a big shocker, but I do really feel like there was this outpouring of empathy and goodwill toward the profession, that if anyone's going to help us, we have to bring ourselves together internally. And I saw bar associations doing that heroically. I saw everyone being willing to, I still remember our treasurer of MSBA at the time, Jennifer Thompson, who was delivering the treasurer's report by Zoom, and her young child was sitting on her lap, and everyone was great with that. And I love that moment. I just thought, this is the moment where we're all getting comfortable with being in, seeing into people, a snippet of people's private lives. And I think we were learning how to handle that and use that insight in a positive way. So I think it was helpful to promote well-being and create that cultural shift in the profession that we're looking for.
Sure. You may say it is a bit, if there was a silver lining to the pandemic and this structure of remote working, that may have been it, at least from my personal experience, because mental health, well-being sort of became part of the national conversation. It was something that we could verbalize and all talk about. And you saw it in all capacities, specifically, to switch to sports for a moment, in tennis, right? Like you had Naomi Osaka talking about her mental health issues and taking a break from the profession because she couldn't focus. Gymnasts doing it. I think Simone Biles did the same thing. And it was something never talked about before. Nobody ever, it was a taboo topic, right? But now it sort of became part of the national conversation. It was like, all right, it's okay to talk about these things and we're all in it together. So Tara, I'm curious your experience with it. And Robin mentioned how this new generation of workers is more vocal about their well-being and say, hey, these working conditions aren't going to work for me, right? And the importance of it. So it is a positive thing, right? In a way that we've never seen before, as Robin mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's very right. And I'm always a little reluctant to make broad generalizations about generations, because I think that there are, there's similarities as well, but I do think there's been more education. People have more experience in law school and college. And I think the point that Joan made about people kind of having that space when you're under threat to think about, what do I want to do? How do I want my life to be? People moved out of cities. People, made different lifestyle choices. And all of that, I think, is, can be, very positive. I don't mean to be, focusing on the negative, but I do think we are also seeing people still experiencing negative mental health impacts, after the pandemic.
Sure.
And so there are some real challenges in terms of even getting people the help they need. I mean, this is why the lawyer assistance programs are so powerful, I think, in every state, because they give people a bridge to further care and options for seeking care. Because, I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing, in firms and in other organizations is that it is a challenge to connect people to the care that they need sometimes. So thinking about ways that we can do that, and that ways that employers can make those connections and offer those services, whether it's through an EAP or some other type of service. So I think we're both making progress, and then also kind of thinking about how do we address some of the real issues that we face as people are willing to take up care more and get the help they need. So it's kind of an interesting balance that I'm seeing now.
Yeah, and as you said, we are certainly not out of the woods. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. As you guys know, and to our new listeners out there, a lot of law firm owners and leaders listen to this podcast. So just kind of picking up on what you said, Tara, what would be your advice to those in law firm leadership positions to create a work environment that's not overwhelming, one that fosters well-being? Joan, I'll throw that one to you.
I'd like to go back to Tara's comment about some of the challenges before we get there.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's a really important thing to recognize. And, early on in the pandemic, my colleague from Pennsylvania, Lori Besden, wrote a blog post called "People in Recovery, You've Got This." Mm-hmm. And it talked about how we were facing something that is unmanageable. We don't understand it. It's front and center in our lives, and we don't quite know what to do with it. And that the tools for recovery would help to get through that. And so that's a positive side of it. But the fact is that across the country, in law and everywhere else, people were drinking more because they could get away with it, because there was no clear 5 o'clock, because it was a way of kind of taking some control. And we would get questions about, we're kind of concerned about this lawyer. We're seeing this. And so we really developed protocols. And I know that labs across the country did this, where having the conversation about, okay, these are some of the things you look for. Here's how to talk to the person. Here are some signs that there might be an issue. And so, for example, behavioral, somebody who used to have their camera on who doesn't, and a number of other kinds of things that might suggest that something is going on. And if you're only communicating remotely, how do you see it? How do you look for it? The same thing with depression, the same thing with anxiety. Anxiety used to be second to depression in terms of the kinds of mental health issues other than substance use that were reported to us. And from the beginning of the pandemic and continuing through today, more people are talking to us saying, I think I might have anxiety versus I think I might be depressed. And we're seeing people getting help later for substance use issues because there wasn't the opportunity to notice. And so these are all things where when we're going out and talking to organizations, doing our CLE programs, things like that, we really want to say, if you think there is an issue and there's somebody working remotely, let's have a conversation about it, because it's a lot easier to hide. And so it may actually be a lot more serious than you thought it was. And the earlier you can reach out to someone and offer help and show a path that is not threatening, the more likely you're going to have that healthy lawyer back if something is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. A great point. Completely new set of social cues working in a remote environment compared to in real life, IRL, right? Signs and symptoms. So very important point there. Robin, just wanted for you to chime in related to that and advice you would give to law firm owners and people in leadership positions, picking up on what Joan said, the signs and the symptoms of flags, but also in general, creating a better work environment, whether it's 50-50, whether it's remote, whether it's in real life. What are your thoughts and what would be your advice to those listening?
I just invite people to consider that you actually can create and be the architect of your work environment in a way that promotes peak performance and flourishing for lawyers. So you don't have to sit back and think, I'm out of control, I can't do anything about this. No, leadership has the opportunity to create that. You create the organizational culture, you set the tone at the top. So if you want to create an environment that promotes the flourishing and peak performance and extraordinary performance of lawyers, if you choose that, you can do that. And there's a whole field of neuroeconomics and neuromanagement that can assist you in identifying the scaffolding and architecture needed to create that. But I would just say, first of all, recognize that you have the authority and power to do it, that it's not something that's so big that you can't touch it, you have no control over it. No, you do. So then the question is, well, what are you going to do with that power that you have as an organizational leader in a law firm or any organization? Well, first of all, recognize that people do their best work under certain circumstances, and they do their worst work or less well in other circumstances. And then you get to create those conditions for people to actually do their best work. All right. So what does that mean? And I would say always partner with your lawyer assistance program, because they have so many resources out there that tell you what things, how do people work well? What things can I do? And think about how you manage your teams. You can also do that as well. One thing I would say, and Joan and I teach about this a lot, is sleep. You can be a sleep manager for your team. Okay. You can say, I know that you need 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep to do your best work.
Sure.
And so when things, I am the architect of the sleep schedule or the sleep opportunities for my team. And think about how sleep can be something that you can weave into the way you run your litigation teams, the way you run your organization, your tone at the top, and your messaging. It's all there, and you have the power to do it. That's what I would say to law firms these days.
Terrific. And just to pick up on that, if someone's watching and let's say they're in a new leadership position, and you mentioned neuroeconomics, I believe you mentioned reaching out to your lawyer assistance programs. Can you dig in a little bit more? What programs are those? How do people find those resources? Just in case they're not sure, maybe they're in a new city, a new situation. Sure. Just give us a bit more detail on that, on resources and how to find them.
Well, I would defer to Joan on that. I'll just give a general answer, which is every state has a lawyer assistance program. Joan is the executive director of the Minnesota Lawyers Assistance Program, but there are programs across the country, and they have the resources and programming available so that you can actually grab those resources and be the architect of what you want to create in your work environment. You can be the architect of your own personal well-being as well as those around you. So I encourage everyone to do that. And of course, there's a whole, Joan and I, again, teach about this, the whole, how you can create trust in organizations, which is really the driver of not only ethical performance, but the more ethical you are, the better for business in terms of the bottom line. And I encourage people, again, to get familiar with the field of neuromanagement and neuroeconomics, which is really the physiological and biological basis for performance. Okay. There is a whole field out there that teaches you what to do. I experiment on myself all the time. And then I bring this information to lawyers because it's useful. It's like, who knew that standing outside even for 30 seconds can help lower your heart rate and regulate your breathing. It's good for well-being, 30 seconds. So just grab this information and empower yourself instead of sitting back and saying, I can't do anything or I can't do things for other people around you. As a senior lawyer, as a mid-level professional, as someone who's new in the field, everyone has the opportunity to create what they want, rather than saying, oh, I'm just at the effect of this profession. I'm at the effect of other people in the environment. No, you don't have to subscribe to that myth.
Sure. Yeah. And like you said, Robin, it really comes from the top down, this idea of neuromanagement, sleep techniques, breathing techniques, getting outside. There's so much at our fingertips now just because we know so much more right? With each year, there's more information being disseminated. And Joan, Robin, mentioned that you could really discuss a bit more about tapping into the necessary resources for someone who's looking to reach out.
Right. Well, thank you. Lawyer assistance programs, you can call and ask any question. Some are going to be more substantially resourced. You may have one person who is serving a state that is much larger than Minnesota, or you may have several people, and so there's going to be a range of services. The bottom line is going to be, if you are struggling, it's a place to go. But it's also going to be a repository for information, and one of those is IWIL, which I assume that Tara or Robin will talk about. But it's a wonderful resource for organizations. A couple of things I would say that when the leaders are when they come to us, it's often about how they are doing, and I think there's a real challenge to, okay, I want to support my team. That doesn't mean that you do the work of the person who you think might have too much on their plate. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of support that a leader can get by talking to someone through a lawyer assistance program. I was doing a CLE a few weeks back, and somebody was saying, well, in our organization, we feel like we can take a sabbatical. They have a sabbatical policy because the leader took one. And it's like, really? We're all looking around. Who does that? It turns out they work for a big accounting firm. So that's why that was happening there. But setting that example, and I think also, communicating that we don't have all the answers. We're trying to figure it out. And I think the people who are being led are going to feel much better if they hear that we don't have the answer to this. We're looking into it, and we need to hear if what we're assuming isn't working for folks. But at the same time, they also have to pay attention to having a profitable organization. But I think, the bottom line is that lawyer assistance programs can be repositories for resources on reducing your risk, practicing well-being, and it also can be the place that you come when you're struggling. The key message, I think, here is that one of the things that's happened with the well-being movement is that there's so many tools out there that people might feel like, oh, I'm not doing that right either. I'm not doing that well enough. Therefore, it's my fault.
Yeah.
And we have to be so careful about that, because you can reduce your risk to nothing, and yet people are still going to have things. Seatbelts didn't stop car accidents or injuries.
Yeah.
So I think leaders thinking about how can I take care of myself and actively doing that and talking about it can be very important.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some really important points there. It's fluid, right? It's evolving. We're learning as we go. This is all new territory, and it's not one size fits all, right? Which is really important. But we do have the guidelines to start with. Tara, I wanted to pivot for a moment. We're talking about leaders of firms and owners of firms and how they're navigating. But what would be your advice to particularly new lawyers, right, that are entering the field when it comes to creating habits for a healthier work life, based on everything we know now, based on, you might say, the silver lining of the pandemic, remote working, these new environments, what we knew before the pandemic? What would be your advice for a better life-work balance, mental health, well-being, awareness as a new lawyer?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I was going to say this very similar thing about leaders as well, which is learning about something or knowing about something is not necessarily doing it, right? And so taking what you know and turning it into any kind of behavior change is a challenge, right? It takes energy, it takes time,
sure,
it takes intentionality. So thinking about, I really think about in this space, relationship building, that would be sort of my number one thing that I would think about for young lawyers, being intentional about whether it's building mentorship, or other types of relationships, but really thinking about how it is that you're going to make those things into habits, into behavior change, whether it's sort of aligning with someone else in your practice or someone else who's starting out at the same level as you, but really thinking about that aspect of it. I think lawyers like information, right? We like to learn things, we like to watch things, we like to read things, but then taking that and turning it into something that is, meaningful behavior change, I can actually be a little bit of a challenge. So even if it's one thing that you want to do, thinking about how you do that, how you make that part of your routine, whether it's sleep, whether it's exercise. A lot of people, I think, really find that exercise impacts their stress management and their ability to kind of feel like they can handle things. And from a leadership perspective too, one of the things that really undermines people's sense of well-being in their jobs is feeling like their boss or their manager is saying something, sort of talking the talk about well-being, but not actually following through on it. So it kind of applies in both ways, to both the leader and to somebody who might be brand new to the profession. You have to think about not just what you're thinking about, but what you're doing.
Yeah, very important. It's not just about coaching, it's actually getting on the field and getting into the game. In our last few minutes, Robin, I want to go to you, and Tara just touched upon it a little bit. Let's talk about some of the incredible organizations that you all work for. Let's discuss IWIL, again, the Institute for Wellbeing in Law. We've mentioned it a little bit throughout, but can you tell us some of the initiatives, some of the projects that you've been engaged in this year, and perhaps what you're working on to come?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. But before I do, let me just mention one other thing to add on to what Tara said about advice to new lawyers.
Yeah.
Financial well-being, okay, is really big deal for the younger generation, okay? That is the biggest cause of stress and anxiety, is student loans and all the other financial insecurities that they may face. So what would be my advice to newer lawyers? Go to your bar association and join the young lawyers section and find and build relationships with your peers. Loneliness and solitude are just high predictors of poor health and poor longevity, and build that, network of people and friendships through your bar association. They all have typically a new lawyers section. New lawyers sections and bars, you need to start providing programming, if you don't already, on financial security, all right, for new lawyers and financial well-being. That's what you got to do, because that's one of the biggest stress drivers for newer lawyers. So now back to IWIL. So let's talk about Institute for Wellbeing in Law. It was founded after the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing report came out. And some of the people who founded it were on that task force, leaders of it. I was later on that task force and came and was a founder for IWIL. Tara has been with us as well for the past few years. And I'll tell you, our mission is really to create a cultural shift in our profession, a cultural shift where we focus on the whole individual, well-being and flourishing of individuals across all dimensions of life, not just your occupation and your professional goals, but all aspects of the human taken as a whole. So that is our goal, the cultural shift. And I consider IWIL a national think tank, like the leading institution that has resources available for people who want to further that mission in their law firms, okay, in their organizations, whatever, there are a lot of stakeholders in the justice system and the legal system, and IWIL has those resources for everyone. And so I would encourage people to join us, go on to our website. We have a fantastic website. We have lots of resources that are available for people that are free. You can come to we have, programming, which Tara will talk about in a moment. She's been integrally involved with our programming, but we have exceptional programming. And we provide it for law schools, we provide it for law students, we provide it for every stakeholder. So I highly encourage people to get educated about it. But I'm really proud of this organization because we really just started, just a few years ago. But we've gotten great support from huge people, huge law firms across the country. Important key stakeholders have supported us, and we've been able to build out this organization and really help to lead that change. So thrilled to be part of IWIL as always.
Absolutely.
Tara, you want to add some more about the programming?
Yeah, please, Tara.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that I should say, many of the things that we're incredibly proud of at IWIL is both the programming that we've done in the past, including things like Well-Being Week in Law, and particularly from my perspective, are the resources that we develop that allow other people, other firms, other organizations, they may not have huge budgets for well-being, to kind of take those resources and use them in their own programs. And then the other thing that IWIL does, I think, incredibly well is cultivate programming that is really influential in terms of bringing together leading experts in areas like, I'll give you an example. We just had Dr. Jason Siegel do a program on what are the things that lead to people uptaking help when they are suffering from depression. And that, I think, is very critical, because what it is telling law firms, organizations, is both what's helpful, but also what is not helpful, right? What should we be saying to people? How should we be offering help? What should we be doing? And in many ways, law firms really need that type of concrete guidance in terms of what they should be doing. And we're really looking to develop that kind of quality programming over time even more. So those types of things, I think, are incredibly powerful, and I feel very proud about those programs in particular.
Absolutely. Like you said, the trial and error, what works but what doesn't work, is just as important. Before we get to Joan and Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, Rob and Tara, just tell us how people can reach out to your organization. What's the website, handles, things like that?
Yep, I would just say go to IWIL, IWIL. Just Google it and you'll get right to our website and you will find all the resources there. So I invite you to reach out.
It's www.lawyerwellbeing.net is the website.
Lawyerwellbeing.net. Terrific. And Joan, let's finish up this incredible conversation discussing Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, the organization you're involved with. Tell us how it's grown, how it's evolved over the years, and what you all are doing to aid the legal community.
Well, thank you. We have been around since 1976, and we're the oldest continuing lawyer assistance program in the country. And we are one of 50, as well as others in Canada, and programs there's a great program in the UK. There are more and more starting to develop around the world. I could name a few countries, but I can't remember them all, so I don't want to leave anyone out. And so this is something that has been happening all over, and everybody's got a different way of doing things, because sometimes it's because of the way the starting of the organization was supported. And so I would encourage everyone to get to know the program in your state. And one of the links I've provided, which will be with the program notes, is to the American Bar Association Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs list of lawyer assistance programs by state. And you can also go to your favorite search engine and put in lawyer assistance programs by state, and you'll get that link. And so that will give you a link to each of those programs, and you can then read about it, contact them, see what they have available, if they can come to your firm and organization and do a CLE or meet with your well-being committee or whatever it might be. And also recognizing that every single one of them is going to be a place you can contact. Our program and others, we are confidential. That is the hallmark of everything we do. And the study that came out in 2016, what people were most afraid of was that other people would find out. That's the stigma around mental health issues. And by providing that confidentiality, it's a safe place to come. Now, some states, they have a relationship with discipline, where only if someone is sent to them by discipline do they monitor to make sure that they are perhaps maintaining whatever mental health care that they're involved in. But many states do not do that. Minnesota does not have that sort of relationship. But even so, if an individual contacts their lab directly, they are never going to report them. They're never going to it's not going to be something that goes anywhere else. And so that confidentiality is important. And the direct services are always free. Of course, some are nonprofits. They rely on donations from doing CLEs, things like that. But the actual services are going to be free. And many of them are available 24/7. There's always someone you can talk to. There's a hotline. That's the case for our program. And then who do we serve? Well, we serve lawyers. We serve judges. We serve law students. Okay, so pretty much everybody does that. There's a couple programs where they're part of their state bar, and because you're not a bar member, you can't be part of it, but that's very unusual. So almost everybody also serves law students. And then many of us, in Minnesota included, we serve all legal professionals, because when you think of the kind of stress we're experiencing, imagine a legal services organization where a prospective client is coming in with this awful thing that either just happened or is about to happen that's going to change their life in a really bad way. Who's going to hear that first? It's not going to be the lawyer.
Right.
And so all of the people who are supporting the work that lawyers do are dealing with a lot of the same stress. And so in Minnesota, we serve all legal professionals. We also serve immediate family members, because if there's a family issue, it's affecting the lawyer. And so we're probably the broadest in terms of services. Another link I provided is to an article that I just did. I think Robin hooked me up for this. It's for Jurist, which is the publication of the International Bar Association. And they did a deep dive into well-being. And we were asked to provide an article describing the work of lawyer assistance programs. So if you want to get a good description of that, you can use the link that will be in the materials.
Amazing. Such invaluable information. And I may have missed it, but Joan, what was the website for Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers?
I did not provide that. It's MNLCL, as in Minnesota Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers.org.
Terrific.
And then you can reach us at help@mnlcl.org. That's a phantom email that comes directly to me.
Amazing. I just have to thank you all, not only for your time for today, but the incredible work that you do and the comprehensive work that you do. And Joan, I just love how you said it's for everyone in the legal profession, all roles, including family members. And a lot of people just might not be aware of it. So it's so important to have these conversations and spread the awareness. So I just want to thank you all once again for your time and all of the great work that you do. It's been a really terrific, comprehensive, and again, invaluable conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And once again, can't stress it enough, a huge thanks to Robin, Tara, and Joan for joining us today. And thank you to all of our listeners. We hope you enjoyed this invaluable, comprehensive conversation. And we'll be back with another episode of Everything Except the Law very soon. We promise. Be sure to check out previous episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the Answering Legal YouTube channel. Links to everything covered in today's conversation, all the valuable links that we just talked about, can be found in the description of this episode. I'm TWB. Thanks so much again for joining us. We'll see you next time.